Hello and welcome to the History Dozer. Before we open the creaking doors of a grand London townhouse, before we descend the servants' stairs or feel the weight of soot on our sleeves, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here, wherever here may be for you. Maybe you're listening from the warmth of your bed, the hum of a train, or a softly lit room at the end of a long day. However you've arrived, I'm glad you did. If you'd like, drop a comment below. Let me know where in the world you are and what time it is for you. It's quietly comforting to think of this little gathering of strangers, each of us touching history together from our own corners of the present. And if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive storytelling, stories that unfold like old letters in candlelight, consider subscribing. It helps me know this kind of tale still matters. But now, let's set down the modern world, just for a while. Let the electric light fade. Let the bells ring in your mind. We're going back. Not to royalty or riches, but to the hidden life behind them, the kitchen hearths, the linen closets, the footsteps no one hears but always expects. The year is 1873. The house is tall and silent. The bells are strung like nerves through every floorboard. And you've just been hired. Not for glory, not for comfort, but because there was no other choice. You wake before the house does. Before the gas lamps fade. Before the fire dares crackle. Before the city, outside the fogged window, even remembers it has a name. The bell has not rung. But it will. It always will. It hangs on the wall like a noose with no rope, just a little tug, and your world is summoned. But not yet. You don't wait for the bell. You know better. You slip out of your cot. A wooden frame, barely long enough for your back. The blanket is thin, stiff with old starch, heavy like guilt. You do not shiver. You're used to the cold. Used to the way it crawls under the door and curls against your neck like an unwanted cat. You dress quickly, in silence. Wool stockings, apron, bodice. Buttons that must be fastened without a wrinkle. Hair that must be pinned, smoothed, hidden. Nothing of yourself must show. Not your shape. Not your scent. Not your story. You light the stove with trembling hands. Ashes sigh beneath your fingers. The match flares like defiance. There is no applause. Just heat. And the start of another day. Downstairs, the house groans, old wood settling like tired bones. The silence is sacred now. You're the only one allowed to make noise. Soft clinks of iron pans. A faint squeak of the scullery tap. Anything louder, and the mistress will mention it over breakfast. And by mention, she means mark you. You scrub the hearth, black with yesterday's heat. You sweep the ash and lay fresh kindling, one room at a time. Drawing rooms first. Then the library. Then the study. Always in order. Always the same. Because if it isn't, if even a single coal is crooked, someone will notice. And someone will speak. You do not want them to speak. The boots come next. 3 pairs by the door, polished until you can see your own ghost in the leather. The master's shoes are large and soft. The kind that never walk too far. The eldest sons still carry mud from yesterday's club. The daughters, she scuffs hers deliberately, to make you work harder. You don't mind. Not anymore. You hum as you polish. Not a tune. Just a sound, low, steady, a rhythm for your hands. It makes you feel less like a shadow. Even shadows need something to hold on to. You haven't eaten yet. You won't until after breakfast is served. Not after you prepare it, after they finish it. You catch your reflection in the hallway mirror. A blur of pale cotton and pinned back hair. You don't smile. You don't frown. You just move on. The day has begun, and already you are invisible. The second bell comes before you've finished wiping the soot from your fingers. It tugs at the wire strung through the servants' hallway, one of a dozen cords running like veins through the heart of the house. Each bell with its own sound, its own demand, its own master. This one? The youngest daughter. Always the first to ring, never the first to rise. She wants her water warm, her curtains drawn just so, and her slippers facing east. Why east? She never says? You never ask. You carry the jug up the servants' stairs, careful not to let the steps creak too loud. One foot just after the other. No rush. No drag. Her door is ajar, as always. Not because she welcomes you, but because she expects you. You knock with your eyes downcast. Step in. Pour the water. Step out. No words are exchanged. They never are. Back downstairs, the kitchen is alive, not with laughter, but with fire and fury. The cook barks orders like a sergeant, her hair already falling from its pins. You set to work folding napkins, aligning silver. Fork on the left. Knife on the right. Spoon above the plate. The mistress demands her breakfast at 8 sharp. Porridge, toast, eggs with yolks unbroken. Not too firm. Not too runny. Not too anything. The table gleams with effort you're not allowed to show. You smooth the cloth until your arms ache. You light the fire in the dining room and blow on it like it's a secret. The clock chimes. They enter. The house shifts. You retreat. They eat. They read. They complain. He says the tea is weak. She says the jam is too sweet. The child throws toast on the floor and watches you clean it like it's a game. You wonder what it feels like to eat while seated, to speak while chewing, to pour milk without trembling. But you don't linger on it. There's washing to do. More silver. More silence. And the bells, they're ringing again. Always the bells. Always calling. Always pulling you back into the walls. You exhale. Quietly. And move. By mid-morning, the house breathes differently. Upstairs life begins to bloom. Voices rise through ceilings. Doors swing open and close like lungs inhaling and exhaling privilege. You carry linens to the mistress's bedroom. A mountain of lace and starch, fragile as mood. The corridor is bright, sun-drenched, full of portraits, not of you, of course, but of people like her. Pale-faced ancestors staring down with oil paint judgment. The mistress walks past you. You press against the wall. She doesn't speak. But her eyes skim you, the way one inspects a cracked teacup. Miss Liddell is to visit. The front salon must be immaculate. That's all she says. That's more than she says most days. You descend, fetch the lemon oil, the cloths, the gloves. The salon must gleam. Not shine, gleam. Shine is for new money. Gleam is understated. Silent. Like you? You polish the piano, though no one's touched it in weeks. You brush crumbs from an ottoman that hasn't seen a guest since Michaelmas. You pause only once. Beside the window. Just long enough to see the world. A boy runs down the lane outside, scarf flapping. You envy his motion. A bell rings. The mistress again. Her bell has a long drawl to it, as if she believes time waits for her. You go. You always go. They don't know your name. They say, girl. They say, you. They say nothing at all. But still, you remember it. You whisper it into your pillow each night, like a prayer, a name, a history, a self. Even if they won't speak it, you will never forget it. It happens in the scullery, where the walls are damp, and the air tastes of iron and steam. You're scrubbing a pan the size of your torso when Mary leans in, voice like a whisper stitched in thread. She called me by the dog's name this morning. You glance at her, just for a second. That's all it takes. Then the both of you are laughing, the kind you bury in dish towels and bite back into silence. Moments like this are treason. Precious. Fleeting. The rebellion doesn't come with raised fists or slammed doors. It comes with a wink from the kitchen maid when you sneak a second spoon of jam. It comes with the stable boy letting you ride the mare 5 steps before he leads her away. It comes with a letter, not yours, but one you read before burning. A note from a footman to a parlor maid. Love wrapped in ink and risk. The cook doesn't speak to you for 2 days after you drop the salt. But on the 3rd morning, you find an extra scone hidden behind the flour bin. Still warm. Some rebellions are louder. One girl wears red thread under her uniform, invisible, unless you know to look for it. One boy told the master's son he'd rather shovel horse dung than polish his shoes. He's gone now. But no one has dared wear that boy's apron since. At night, you lie awake in the attic room, listening to the house groan and settle. You and the others breathe in unison, not from friendship, but from fatigue. But in the dark, someone whispers a joke. Then another adds a word. And soon there is quiet laughter. Like music through the walls. You do not have freedom. But you have your own language. A hidden tongue of glances, smirks, crumbs saved, doors left ajar. This is how you survive. Not just with labor, but with small, stubborn joys they can't quite stamp out. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for tonight. It starts with a cough. Just a dry catch at the back of your throat, soot you think. Dust from the grate. But the next day, it's deeper. By the third, you're waking with fever-slick skin and hands that shake while buttoning your apron. You don't tell anyone. You can't. There is no sick day. There is no rest. You are needed. Always. So you move slower. Quieter. You press a damp cloth to your lips between tasks. The house doesn't notice. But Mary does. She slips you a lemon, wrapped in torn linen. Boil it with honey. If you can find any. You do. In the dark, after the bells stop ringing. It helps. Not much. But just enough. Others aren't so lucky. Last year, one of the footmen twisted his ankle on the servants' stairs. It swelled like a melon. He was gone within 2 days. Sent home, they said. But no one ever saw him leave. And then there was Elsie. She started missing steps. Trays rattled in her hands. One morning, she dropped a porcelain cup, blue-edged bone china. A wedding gift. No one screamed. No one had to. She was gone by supper. Her bed empty, her uniform gone. No trunk. No goodbye. You asked where she went? The cook muttered. Someplace quieter. That was all. You walk through the house like a shadow, but you are still made of skin. Still breakable. Still disposable. They won't beat you here. Not like the factories. Not like the poorhouses. No, here it's softer. Colder. A smile instead of a scold. A dismissal instead of a blow. You whisper your name into the linen cupboard, just to hear it still exists. You whisper hers, too. Elsie. Somewhere, there's a plate she cleaned. A hallway she scrubbed. A pair of hands just like yours. Now she's gone. And tomorrow, if the cough doesn't fade, it might be you. It's a Sunday, and by some stroke of mercy, it's your half-day. Not every servant gets one. Not every house grants them. But here, if the linen's pressed and the fire laid just so, and the bells are mercifully quiet, you may take a few hours. You wash your face twice. Once for the dirt. Once for the girl underneath. You trade your apron for a wool skirt, faded but yours. You pin your hair a little looser than they allow. And then you leave. You step out the back door like a thief. But there's no one chasing you. No one watching. For once, the city is yours. You walk with no destination. Just to feel your feet carry you where bells do not. Past the market stalls and the coal carts. Past chimney sweeps and livery boys. You see children chasing each other through puddles. You don't know whether to smile or ache. You buy a roll from a vendor with a crooked smile. He doesn't ask your station. He calls you, Miss. Just that. Not, girl. Not, maid. Not, you there. You find a bench. You sit. And for one rare, perfect moment, you are not in service. You are not invisible. You are not a shadow. You are just a woman, eating bread in the light. You watch a tram rattle past. And you wonder, what if you boarded it? What if you simply didn't come back? But the thought withers as quickly as it blooms. You cannot leave. Not yet. There is no place to go where you would not still be in someone's way. So you sit a little longer. You breathe. And when the church bell tolls 3 times, you rise. Back to the house. back to the apron, back to the bells. But you carry the sunlight in your pocket. And for now, it is enough. There was a crack in the banister on the third-floor landing, a hairline fracture in the polished mahogany that you had touched 1,000 times. Not because it mattered to anyone else, not because it was a flaw to be reported or repaired, but because it was yours. A splinter of wood, almost imperceptible, unnoticed by anyone above stairs, by the gloved hands of the mistress or the casual brush of the master's sleeve. But to you, it was a marker, a truth. A small, defiant scar the house couldn't smooth away, a silent testament to your presence. You didn't write your name there. You wouldn't dare. Such an act would be an unforgivable transgression, an assertion of self that would be met with swift and merciless punishment. But in your mind it was etched. Right beside the memory of a sister lost to the mills, her small, frail body swallowed by the grinding machinery, her laughter replaced by the ceaseless roar of industry. A father who drank to forget, his eyes hollowed by despair, his hands, once strong, now trembling. A promise you made to your mother, whispered on her deathbed, that you'd send home every penny you didn't spend, a futile hope in a world that offered so little. No one in this house knew that. They knew your posture, ramrod straight, disciplined. They knew your silence, a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility. They knew your apron, crisp and white, a symbol of your servitude. But not you. They knew the maid, the girl, the servant. They did not know Eliza. The mistress grew older, her face etched with faint lines of discontent, her voice acquiring a sharper edge. The master grew slower, his steps heavier, his complaints more frequent. The children grew taller, sharper, colder, their youthful innocence hardening into the brittle shell of privilege. Miss Eleanor, once a demanding child, was now a demanding young woman, her whims more elaborate, her disregard for you more absolute. And you? You became more precise, more invisible, more necessary. Like the very foundations of the house, unseen but indispensable. Each year, your movements grew more economical, your understanding of the house's rhythms more profound. You anticipated needs before they were voiced, moved through rooms like a whisper, leaving no trace but the gleam of polished surfaces and the scent of beeswax. Once, years ago, the youngest, Master Edward, a fleeting moment of childish curiosity, had asked your name. You told him, your voice soft, hesitant. He forgot it within the hour, his attention captured by a toy soldier, the fleeting interaction erased from his memory as easily as dust from a polished table. It was a small wound, but it festered, a constant reminder of your insignificance. Years passed. Rooms changed, furniture replaced, new fashions adopted. But the bell's string stayed the same. The pull of it. The call. The command. A constant, unyielding tether. And still you answered. But some nights, when the fire burned low in the great hall, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and no one stirred, when the house was truly asleep, you would walk to the edge of the carpet they walked on with shoes you polished. And you would whisper, I was here. Not for them. Not for thanks. Not for recognition. But for you. Because though this house, with its endless demands and its crushing indifference, tried to swallow you whole, to erase your very being, it never quite managed. You kept something they couldn't take. Not your time, which was theirs from dawn till dusk. Not your youth, which withered in their service. Not your hands, which were scarred and calloused by their demands. But your name. And in the silence, in the vast, echoing emptiness of the house, you said it aloud. Once more. And let it echo. Just in case the walls were listening. The autumn winds brought not only the crisp scent of burning leaves but also a new tremor through the household, the arrival of Miss Charlotte Davies, the new governess for the younger children, Master Edward and Miss Clara. The previous governess, a stern woman with spectacles perched on her nose, had departed abruptly after a particularly egregious prank by Edward involving a live frog in her tea. Her departure had left a void, and a subtle hum of anticipation, or perhaps dread, rippled through the servant quarters. You heard the carriage before you saw it, the crunch of wheels on the gravel drive, the neigh of horses. You were polishing the brass knocker on the front door, a task usually reserved for the footman, but he was busy with the delivery. You straightened, your eyes instinctively drawn to the approaching vehicle. It was a modest carriage, not grand, but well maintained. A young woman emerged, her figure slender, her dress simple but neat. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was pulled back in a practical bun, but a few rebellious tendrils escaped around her face. What struck you most were her eyes, a clear, intelligent gray that seemed to take in everything, missing nothing. She didn't have the haughty, distant gaze of Lady Ashworth, nor the nervous, downcast look of most servants. She looked curious, and a little tired. You lowered your gaze, resuming your polishing, but you felt her eyes on you for a moment, a fleeting, unreadable glance. The butler, Mr. Finch, a man whose spine was as stiff as his starched collar, greeted her with a polite but reserved air. "Welcome, Miss Davies. I trust your journey was satisfactory?" "Quite, thank you, Mr. Finch." Her voice was soft, yet clear, with an educated lilt. "And you must be—" She gestured vaguely towards you. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, a sound of mild discomfort. "This is Eliza, one of the housemaids, Mississippi. She assists with general duties." He offered no further explanation, no surname, no acknowledgement of your individual identity. It was a familiar dismissal. You kept your head bowed, your hands moving rhythmically over the brass. You felt a strange prickle of something, not resentment, not anger, but a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. Most of the family and their guests simply looked through you. Miss Davies had actually seen you, if only for a second. Over the next few days, the house absorbed Miss Davies into its intricate machinery. She was given a small, sparsely furnished room on the second floor, a step up from the attic, but still far from the luxurious chambers of the family. She took to her duties with quiet efficiency, her voice often heard in the schoolroom, patiently explaining lessons to the restless children. You observed her from the periphery, as you did everyone. She was different. She didn't ring her bell incessantly. She often carried her own books, rather than summoning a maid to fetch them. And once you saw her helping the kitchen maid carry a heavy basket of laundry, a small, almost imperceptible act of kindness that would have been unthinkable for Lady Ashworth. One afternoon, you were dusting the library, a vast room filled with towering bookshelves and the scent of old paper and leather. Miss Davies entered, seeking a particular volume. She moved quietly, her footsteps barely disturbing the thick carpet. As she reached for a book on a high shelf, she misjudged, and a small, leather-bound volume slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft thud on the floor. You instinctively moved to pick it up, but she was quicker. As she bent, her eyes met yours. "Oh, thank you, Eliza," she said, her voice gentle. And then, she added, almost as an afterthought, "That was very quick of you." Your breath hitched. She had used your name. Not girl. Not you. And she had offered a small, genuine compliment. It was such a small thing, a mere handful of words, but it felt like a sudden, unexpected warmth spreading through your chest. You mumbled a polite, almost inaudible, "You're welcome, miss," and retreated, your heart thrumming with a strange, unfamiliar sensation. This small interaction, this fleeting moment of recognition, became a secret comfort. It was a tiny crack in the impenetrable wall between upstairs and downstairs, a hint that perhaps, just perhaps, not everyone saw you as merely a function of the house. It was a dangerous thought, a seed of hope that could easily be crushed, but for now, it was enough to make the endless tasks a little less burdensome, the silence a little less oppressive. The servants' hall was a world unto itself, a subterranean kingdom governed by its own strict hierarchy and unspoken rules. It was a place of worn wooden tables, hard benches, and the pervasive smell of stale cooking, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. Here, the rigid silence enforced upstairs loosened, replaced by a low hum of conversation, the clatter of cutlery, and the occasional burst of tired laughter. Mary, your closest confidant in this confined world, nudged you with her elbow as you sat peeling potatoes for supper. Her eyes, usually bright with suppressed mischief, were clouded with concern. "Did you hear about young Sarah from the kitchen?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic thud of the cook chopping vegetables. You shook your head, your knife continuing its steady work. News traveled slowly, often distorted, through the labyrinthine passages of the house. "She's gone," Mary continued, her voice dropping further. "Just like Elsie. The housekeeper said she was unsuitable. But cook said she saw her weeping, her face all red and blotchy, being led out by Mr. Finch himself. And she left her shawl behind." A cold knot tightened in your stomach. Sarah was barely 15, a timid girl with a perpetually worried expression. "Unsuitable for what?" you murmured, though you already knew the unspoken implications. "Sent home," was the polite fiction. "Dismissed without a character," was the harsh reality, a sentence that often meant destitution, the workhouse, or worse. Cook thinks she might have been caught with something. Or someone," Mary hinted darkly, her eyes darting towards the closed door to the housekeeper's office. "Master George, perhaps. He's always lurking about the kitchen, isn't he?" Master George was the eldest son, a dissolute young man with a reputation for gambling and a roving eye. The thought sent a shiver down your spine. A servant girl caught in a liaison with a master was a scandal, a stain that could ruin both parties, though the consequences for the servant were always far more severe. The whispers in the servants' hall were a vital lifeline, a shared repository of information, grievances, and fears. It was where you learned of the master's latest financial woes, the mistress's escalating demands, the children's secret misdeeds. It was also where you heard tales of other houses, other servants, other fates. Stories of kind masters and cruel mistresses, of lucky breaks and sudden downfalls. Old Mrs. Higgins, the laundry supervisor, a woman whose hands were permanently scalded and whose face was a road map of wrinkles, often shared her wisdom, dispensed in cryptic pronouncements. "Keep your eyes down, girl," she'd croak, "and your mouth shut. And never let M see you bleed." Her words, though harsh, were born of a lifetime of survival in this brutal world. The footmen, with their starched collars and polished boots, often brought news from the outside world, snippets of political gossip or sensational crimes reported in the penny dreadfuls they secretly devoured. The coachman, a burly man named Silas, was a fount of information about the comings and goings of the family, their secret assignations, their clandestine visits. You learned to read between the lines, to discern truth from rumor, to understand the subtle currents of power that flowed through the house. You learned that loyalty was a fragile thing, easily broken by fear or ambition. You learned that trust was a dangerous luxury, best reserved for those who truly earned it. The disappearance of Sarah, however, cast a long shadow. It was a stark reminder of your own precarious position, of the thin thread by which your livelihood hung. You were replaceable, expendable. A broken cup, a spilled salt cellar, a whispered rumor, any of these could lead to your own vanishing. That night, as you lay on your cot in the attic, the shared laughter of the other maids was subdued. The usual jokes were absent. Instead, there was a heavy silence, punctuated only by the creak of the house and the quiet rustle of blankets. You thought of Sarah, out there somewhere, perhaps cold and hungry, perhaps worse. And you clutched the small, smooth stone you kept hidden under your pillow, a comfort against the cold, a small anchor in a world of uncertainty. The whispers in the servants' hall had painted a grim picture, a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers that lurked beneath the veneer of polite society. It was a Tuesday, your day for cleaning the drawing-room, a cavernous space reserved for formal entertaining. Sunlight, when it managed to pierce the perpetual London smog, streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten spirits. You moved silently, a duster in hand, meticulously wiping down every surface, from the ornate gilded mirrors to the delicate porcelain figurines. As you polished the grand piano, its dark, gleaming surface reflecting your bowed head, you heard the soft strains of music. It was Miss Davies, the governess, in the schoolroom just down the hall. She was playing the piano, not the simple scales and exercises she taught the children, but a complex, melancholic melody. It was a piece you recognized, though you didn't know its name, a waltz, perhaps, or a nocturne. You paused, your hand hovering over the keys. The music was beautiful, a cascade of notes that filled the air with a bittersweet longing. It was so different from the harsh realities of your day, from the constant demands and the oppressive silence. It spoke of a world you could only imagine, a world of leisure and beauty, of emotions freely expressed. Miss Davies played with a quiet intensity, her fingers dancing over the keys. You imagined her in a different setting, perhaps in a concert hall, dressed in a gown of silk, her talent celebrated, admired. It was a stark contrast to her current existence, teaching unruly children and enduring the subtle slights of Lady Ashworth. Even a governess, though higher in status than a housemaid, was still a servant, still dependent on the whims of her employers. As the last notes faded, you heard a soft sigh. You quickly resumed your dusting, feigning absorption in your task. But then, Miss Davies spoke, her voice soft, almost to herself. "Oh, to have a moment," she murmured, and then, louder. "Eliza, are you still here?" You straightened, turning to face her. She stood in the doorway of the schoolroom, a book in her hand, her gray eyes thoughtful. "Yes, miss," you replied, your voice barely a whisper. She smiled faintly, a tired, wistful expression. "That was a lovely piece you were playing, Mississippi. I enjoy listening." A faint flush rose to her cheeks. "Thank you, Eliza. It's a comfort. Sometimes one needs a moment of beauty, does one not?" You nodded, unable to articulate the depth of your agreement. A moment of beauty was a rare and precious thing in your life. She hesitated, then continued, her voice lower. "You know, I used to dream of being a concert pianist. My father, he encouraged it. But then..." Her gaze drifted to the window, to the gray London sky. "Life has a way of redirecting one's path." It was the most personal thing any of the upstairs people had ever said to you. A glimpse into her past, into a dream unfulfilled. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability, a crack in the facade of polite distance. "I understand, miss," you found yourself saying, the words surprising even yourself. You thought of your own lost dreams, of the life you might have had if circumstances had been different. A life where your sister hadn't been swallowed by the mills, where your father hadn't drowned his sorrows, where you hadn't been forced into service. She looked at you then, truly looked, and for a moment, her eyes held a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by her usual composed expression. "Well," she said, straightening, "the children will be back soon. I must prepare their lessons." She turned to leave, then paused. "Eliza, if you ever wish to hear more, you may come to the schoolroom when the children are out. I often play in the afternoons." Your heart gave a small, hopeful leap. It was an invitation, a gesture of camaraderie that transcended the rigid boundaries of their world. "Thank you, miss," you said, a genuine smile touching your lips for the first time that day. As she left, you resumed your dusting, but your movements were lighter, imbued with a newfound sense of purpose. The music still echoed in your mind, but now it was accompanied by the image of Miss Davies's tired smile, her shared vulnerability. It was a small, fragile connection, a glimpse of another life, another possibility. It was a reminder that even in this house of shadows, there were moments of unexpected light, of shared humanity. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of something more. Part 11. The Master's Secret. The Master, Lord Ashworth, was a man of routines and habits, as predictable as the chiming of the hall clock. His days were spent in his study, surrounded by ledgers and legal texts, punctuated by visits to his club and occasional business meetings. He was a distant figure, rarely interacting with the servants beyond a curt nod or a muttered command. His presence was felt more as an oppressive weight, a silent authority that permeated every corner of the house. It was during your weekly cleaning of his study that you began to notice the discrepancies. The room was always meticulously kept, almost sterile in its order. Yet there were subtle signs of a hidden life. A faint scent of cheap tobacco, distinct from the master's expensive cigars, sometimes lingered in the air, especially near the large, leather-bound desk. And once you found a crumpled theater program tucked beneath a stack of financial papers, for a play that was decidedly not of the highbrow variety Lord Ashworth usually attended. One afternoon, as you were dusting the shelves behind his desk, your hand brushed against a loose panel in the mahogany. It gave way with a soft click, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. Your heart hammered against your ribs. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion for a servant, warred with ingrained caution. You hesitated for only a second. Inside, nestled amongst a few old letters tied with ribbon, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. You lifted it, your fingers trembling slightly. It was surprisingly light. You opened it. Inside lay a miniature portrait, exquisitely painted. It was the face of a young woman, not Lady Ashworth. Her hair was a riot of fiery red curls, her eyes a startling shade of green, and her lips curved in a playful, almost defiant smile. She was beautiful, vibrant, and utterly unlike the austere mistress of the house. Beneath the portrait lay a single, faded rose, its petals brittle with age, and a small, tarnished silver locket. You carefully opened the locket. Inside, 2 tiny photographs, one of the red-haired woman, and the other, unmistakably, of a young boy. A boy with the same fiery red hair and mischievous green eyes. He looked strikingly similar to Master George, the eldest son, but with a warmth and openness that George lacked. A wave of understanding, cold and sharp, washed over you. The master had a secret. A hidden life, a forgotten love, perhaps even a child born outside the rigid confines of his marriage. The cheap tobacco, the theater program, the clandestine compartment, it all clicked into place. The stoic, unyielding Lord Ashworth had a past, a vulnerability, a human dimension you had never imagined. You quickly, carefully, replaced everything, ensuring the panel clicked shut perfectly. You continued your dusting, your movements outwardly calm, but your mind racing. The discovery was a dangerous burden. To know such a secret was to possess a power you did not want, a knowledge that could shatter the fragile peace of the house, and potentially, your own precarious existence. The implications were vast. Was this woman still alive? Was the boy? Did Lady Ashworth know? The thought sent a shiver down your spine. The mistress, for all her coldness, was a formidable presence. If she were to discover such a betrayal. You finished your duties in the study, your senses heightened, every creak of the floorboards, every distant voice, a potential threat. You left the room, the secret heavy in your chest, a silent weight. Later that evening, as you served dinner, you looked at Lord Ashworth with new eyes. He sat at the head of the table, impassive, discussing politics with Lady Ashworth. But now, you saw the faint lines of weariness around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand as he raised his wine glass. He was not just a master. He was a man burdened by secrets, by choices made long ago. The discovery was a stark reminder that even those who held power were not immune to the complexities and sorrows of life. It also reinforced the precariousness of your own position. You were a witness, an unseen observer of their lives, privy to their hidden truths. But that knowledge, while illuminating, was also a heavy burden, a secret you would carry alone, locked away in the silent chambers of your mind, just like the miniature portrait in the master's hidden compartment. Later that evening, as you served dinner, you looked at Lord Ashworth with new eyes. He sat at the head of the table, impassive, discussing politics with Lady Ashworth. But now, you saw the faint lines of weariness around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand as he raised his wine glass. He was not just a master. He was a man burdened by secrets, by choices made long ago. The discovery was a stark reminder that even those who held power were not immune to the complexities and sorrows of life. It also reinforced the precariousness of your own position. You were a witness, an unseen observer of their lives, privy to their hidden truths. But that knowledge, while illuminating, was also a heavy burden, a secret you would carry alone, locked away in the silent chambers of your mind, just like the miniature portrait in the master's hidden compartment. The approach of Christmas always brought a flurry of activity to the Ashworth household, but this year, it was intensified by the announcement of a grand Christmas ball. Lady Ashworth, determined to outshine her rivals in society, decreed that no expense or effort would be spared. For the servants, it meant weeks of relentless preparation, transforming the house into a glittering spectacle, a stage for the family's social performance. You scrubbed and polished until your hands were raw, your arms ached, and your back screamed in protest. Every surface had to gleam, every piece of silver had to sparkle. The chandeliers, usually dusted once a month, were taken down, piece by delicate piece, and individually cleaned, their crystals catching the light like frozen tears. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, lemon oil, and the faint, cloying sweetness of pine needles as garlands were draped over every doorway and mantelpiece. The night of the ball arrived, a whirlwind of carriages crunching on the gravel, the murmur of voices, and the rustle of expensive gowns. From the servants' hall, you could hear the distant strains of the orchestra, the rhythmic thud of dancing feet, and the bright, brittle laughter of the guests. You and the other maids were dressed in your best, stiffest uniforms, ready to serve, to glide through the throng, offering refreshments, clearing plates, always unseen, always unheard. As you moved through the crowded ballroom, a tray of champagne glasses balanced precariously in your hands, you caught glimpses of the guests. Ladies in silks and satins, jewels sparkling at their throats. Gentlemen in crisp evening wear, their conversations punctuated by hearty laughs. It was a world of dazzling light and superficial gaiety, a stark contrast to the dim, laborious existence below stairs. You saw Miss Eleanor, now a young woman on the cusp of her debut, dancing gracefully with a handsome young officer. Her face was flushed with excitement, her eyes bright. You saw Master George, looking bored and restless, lingering by the punch bowl, his gaze sweeping over the younger maids with a familiar, unsettling intensity. You kept your own eyes fixed on the tray, your movements precise. Later, as the night wore on and the guests grew more boisterous, you found yourself in a quiet alcove, collecting empty glasses. The music was a lively waltz, its melody infectious. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside you. It was Miss Davies, the governess, her simple dark gown a stark contrast to the elaborate attire of the guests. She held a single, half-empty glass of lemonade. "A moment of peace, Eliza?" she murmured, a faint smile playing on her lips. You nodded, grateful for the brief respite. "It is very grand, Mississippi," she sighed, her gaze sweeping over the dancers. "Grand, perhaps, but also exhausting. All this pretense." She looked at you, her gray eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever wish you could join them, Eliza? Just for a moment?" The question caught you off guard. You had never allowed yourself to truly consider it. The idea was absurd, impossible. "It is not our place, miss," you replied, the ingrained response automatic. "Perhaps not," she conceded, her voice soft. "But one can still dream, can't one?" She extended her hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Come. Just for a moment. No one will notice." Your eyes widened. She was inviting you to dance. In the middle of the Ashworth Christmas ball. It was madness. It was exhilarating. You hesitated, your heart pounding. The risk was immense. Discovery would mean instant dismissal, ruin. But the temptation, the sheer audacity of the offer, was overwhelming. "But, miss," you began, your voice trembling. "A single turn," she urged, her eyes twinkling. "A secret dance. Just you and I." Before you could fully comprehend the implications, she took your hand. Her touch was warm, surprisingly firm. She led you to a less crowded corner of the ballroom, near a large potted palm. The music swelled, a joyous, swirling melody. She took your other hand, and with a gentle pull, she guided you into a simple waltz step. You were clumsy at first, your feet accustomed to the practical, silent movements of service, not the graceful turns of a dance. But Miss Davies was patient, her movements fluid, her quiet guidance reassuring. For a few precious moments, you were not Eliza, the housemaid. You were simply a woman dancing. The music filled your ears, the rhythm flowed through your body. You spun, you dipped, you turned, your uniform forgotten, the weight of your duties momentarily lifted. You felt a lightness you hadn't known existed, a pure, unadulterated joy. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. Miss Davies squeezed your hand, a silent signal. You broke apart, resuming your roles, your faces composed. A passing footman glanced in your direction, but saw nothing amiss. "Thank you, miss," you whispered, your voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "My pleasure, Eliza. Now, I believe I saw Lady Ashworth looking for me." She melted back into the crowd, leaving you standing there, your heart still thrumming, your cheeks flushed. The champagne glasses on your tray seemed to sparkle with a new light. You had danced. A hidden dance, a secret rebellion. It was a memory you would cherish, a moment of pure, unadulterated freedom stolen from the very heart of your servitude. The Christmas ball, for all its superficiality, had given you a glimpse of something real, something beautiful, something utterly, wonderfully yours. Following the Christmas ball, a subtle shift began to ripple through the Ashworth household, a quiet unease that permeated the very fabric of the house. Lord Ashworth, already a man of distant habits, began to decline. It was a slow, insidious process, barely perceptible at first, then gaining a relentless momentum. His visits to the study became less frequent, his hours spent with ledgers replaced by long periods of staring blankly into the fire. His once crisp suit seemed to hang loosely on his frame, and his complexion, always pale, grew a sickly gray. The scent of cheap tobacco, which you had once associated with his secret life, now seemed to cling to him, a pervasive, unpleasant odor. Lady Ashworth, ever concerned with appearances, initially dismissed his ailments as a mere seasonal indisposition. But as weeks turned into months, her dismissive tone gave way to a strained politeness, then to thinly veiled exasperation. The family doctor, a portly man with a perpetually worried frown, became a frequent visitor, his hushed conversations with the mistress echoing faintly through the closed doors of the drawing-room. For the servants, the master's decline meant a new layer of anxiety. A sick master was an unpredictable master. His bell, once a sharp, authoritative summons, now rang with a weak, tremulous jingle, often for no discernible reason. He would call for a glass of water, then forget he had asked for it. He would demand a specific book, only to stare at it unseeing when it was placed in his hands. You found yourself increasingly drawn into his care, assisting the valet with his dressing, bringing him his meals, which he often picked at listlessly. One afternoon, as you helped him into his dressing gown, his hand, thin and papery, brushed against yours. His eyes, usually cold and distant, held a momentary flicker of something akin to fear, or perhaps, recognition. "Eliza?" he rasped, his voice a faint whisper. Is that you?" Your breath hitched. He had used your name. Not girl. Not you. It was the first time he had spoken it, truly spoken it, since that fleeting moment in your childhood. It was a chilling reminder of his deteriorating state, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of his authority. You simply nodded, your throat tight. "Yes, my lord." He sighed, a long, rattling breath. "The house, it's so quiet. Too quiet." He looked around the opulent bedroom, his gaze unfocused. "She's not here, is she? My Clara." Clara was the name of the woman in the miniature portrait, the woman with fiery red hair. Your heart pounded. He was confused, his mind wandering. He was speaking of his secret, his hidden life, openly, unaware of your presence, or perhaps uncaring. "No, my lord," you murmured, your voice as neutral as you could make it. "Lady Ashworth is downstairs." He closed his eyes, a faint moan escaping his lips. "Ah. Yes. Lady Ashworth." The name was tinged with a bitterness that surprised you. The incident left you deeply unsettled. The master's secret, once a hidden burden, was now threatening to spill out, to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of the Ashworth family. You wondered if Lady Ashworth suspected, if she knew the truth of his past. His decline seemed to bring his hidden life to the surface, like a fever breaking through a carefully maintained composure. The atmosphere in the servants' hall grew tense. Whispers of "The master's failing," replaced the usual gossip. The cook complained of wasted food, the housekeeper fretted over the master's unpredictable demands. Even Mr. Finch, usually unflappable, seemed to carry a new weight on his shoulders. Miss Davies, too, seemed to sense the shift. She often lingered in the schoolroom, her piano playing becoming more frequent, more melancholic. You sometimes saw her watching the master from a distance, her gray eyes filled with a quiet pity. The house, once a fortress of order and routine, now felt fragile, teetering on the brink of an unspoken crisis. The master's decline was not just a personal tragedy, it was a threat to the very stability of the household, a harbinger of uncertain times for everyone, especially those who depended on its continued existence for their very survival. You continued your duties, but with a heightened sense of vigilance, aware that the ground beneath your feet was shifting, and that the future of the Ashworth household, and your place within it, was becoming increasingly precarious. The master's decline was not merely a matter of health. It was inextricably linked to the growing shadow of debt that began to engulf the Ashworth household. Whispers, initially faint and dismissive, began to circulate through the servants' hall, growing louder and more insistent with each passing week. The footmen, who often overheard snippets of conversation from the drawing-room, spoke of unfortunate investments and strained finances. You noticed the subtle changes first. The quality of the food in the kitchen, once abundant and of the finest quality, began to diminish. The butcher's bills were scrutinized with a new, almost desperate intensity by the cook, who grumbled about cheaper cuts of meat and fewer fresh vegetables. The wine cellar, once overflowing, was now noticeably depleted, and the master's expensive claret was replaced by a less distinguished vintage. Lady Ashworth, usually so meticulous about her appearance, began to wear the same gowns more frequently, and her visits to the dressmaker became less regular. Miss Eleanor's debutante ball, once the talk of the house, was now spoken of with a vague, unsettling uncertainty. The most telling sign, however, came from the tradesmen. The once prompt deliveries of coal, candles, and other household necessities became erratic. Suppliers who had served the Ashworth family for generations began to send increasingly insistent notes, demanding payment. You saw the housekeeper, Mrs. Briggs, her face drawn and worried, trying to placate a furious baker who threatened to cut off their bread supply. "The master is indisposed, Mr. Henderson," she'd say, her voice strained. "Payment will be made as soon as he is able." But Mr. Henderson, a burly man with flour dusting his apron, was unconvinced. "Indisposed or not, Mrs. Briggs, my family needs to eat. And the Ashworths owe me a considerable sum." The tension in the house was palpable. The master's study, once a symbol of his authority, now seemed to emanate an aura of quiet desperation. You noticed that the valuable silver platters and decorative objects from the drawing-room were sometimes absent for a few days, only to reappear, polished to a new gleam, a silent testament to their temporary journey to the pawnbroker. One afternoon, as you were cleaning the master's study, you found a letter carelessly left on his desk. It was from a solicitor, its language formal and chilling. It spoke of outstanding liabilities, foreclosure, and the regrettable necessity of asset liquidation. Your heart sank. The words, though legalistic, painted a stark picture of impending ruin. The shadow of debt was not just a concern for the family. It was a direct threat to the livelihoods of every servant in the house. If the Ashworths fell, so too would their staff. The thought of being let go, of being cast out into the unforgiving streets of London without a character reference, was a terrifying prospect. It meant the workhouse, or worse, a life of desperate poverty. Mary, ever observant, noticed your worried expression. "Something's amiss, isn't it, Eliza?" she whispered as you sat together in the kitchen, shelling peas. "The master's always been tight-fisted, but now it's like a shroud has fallen over the house." You simply nodded, unable to articulate the depth of your fear. The secret of the master's hidden compartment, the miniature portrait, now seemed almost trivial in comparison to this looming catastrophe. His personal indiscretions paled against the threat of financial collapse. The servants, usually so engrossed in their own daily struggles, began to band together in a quiet, unspoken solidarity. They shared meager portions of food, offered small comforts to one another, and kept a vigilant eye on the family's increasingly erratic behavior. The house, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a sinking ship, and you, along with the other servants, were trapped on its lower decks, bracing for the inevitable impact. The shadow of death was long and cold, and it threatened to engulf you all. In the midst of the Ashworth household's slow descent into financial and personal turmoil, Miss Charlotte Davies, the governess, emerged as a quiet, unexpected source of strength. Unlike the other members of the family, who seemed to crumble under the weight of their misfortunes, Miss Davies maintained a calm composure, a quiet dignity that was both admirable and perplexing. You observed her closely, as you did everyone. While Lady Ashworth grew increasingly irritable and withdrawn, snapping at servants and retreating to her room, Miss Davies continued her lessons with Master Edward and Miss Clara with unwavering patience. She seemed to understand the children's anxieties, their unspoken fears about the changing atmosphere in the house, and offered them a steadying presence. Her piano playing, once a melancholic comfort, now seemed to take on a new resonance, a quiet defiance. You often heard her playing late into the evenings, after the children were asleep, the notes drifting through the silent house like a balm. It was a music that spoke not of sorrow, but of resilience, of enduring beauty in the face of hardship. One afternoon, you were cleaning the schoolroom, tidying away the children's books and slates. Miss Davies was seated at the piano, her back to you, her fingers moving softly over the keys. She didn't stop when you entered, a silent acknowledgement of your presence, a rare comfort. "Eliza," she said without turning, her voice low. "Are you well?" The question, simple as it was, caught you off guard. No one in the house ever asked you such a thing. You were expected to be well, to be functional, to be invisible. "Yes, miss," you replied, a little too quickly. She paused her playing, turning on the piano stool to face you. Her gray eyes, usually so composed, held a flicker of something akin to concern. "You seem preoccupied. The house is a heavy place these days, is it not?" You hesitated, then nodded, unable to deny the truth. "It is, Mississippi." She sighed, a soft, weary sound. "I hear the whispers, Eliza. The tradesmen, the bills. It is a difficult time for everyone." She looked at you directly. "Especially for those who depend on the house for their livelihood." Her directness was disarming. She spoke of the unspoken, of the fears that gnawed at you and the other servants. I worry, miss," you admitted, the words spilling out before you could stop them. "If they can no longer keep us." Miss Davies reached out, her hand resting briefly on your arm, a gesture of unexpected warmth. "I understand your fear, Eliza. Believe me, I do." She withdrew her hand, clasping her own in her lap. "My own family, we lost everything when my father died. That is why I am here. I know what it is to face uncertainty." It was another glimpse into her past, a shared vulnerability that bridged the vast social divide between you. She was not just a governess, she was a woman who had known hardship, who understood the precariousness of life. "But," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength, "we must not give in to despair. We must continue to do our best, to maintain our dignity, no matter the circumstances." She looked at you, her gaze steady. "And we must look out for one another. Is that not so?" You nodded, a surge of gratitude swelling in your chest. Her words were a lifeline, a quiet reassurance in a sea of anxiety. "Yes, miss," you said, your voice firmer now. "We do." From that day forward, a new understanding settled between you and Miss Davies. It was not a friendship, not in the traditional sense, but a quiet alliance, a shared recognition of the harsh realities of their existence within the crumbling edifice of the Ashworth household. She would sometimes leave books for you in the schoolroom, simple stories or poems, knowing you devoured any scrap of literature you could find. She would offer a kind word, a sympathetic glance, a small gesture of humanity that made the burden of your daily tasks a little lighter. Miss Davies's quiet strength became a beacon in the darkening house. She was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, it was possible to maintain one's composure, one's dignity, and one's compassion. And in a world that sought to render you invisible, her acknowledgment, her quiet understanding, was a precious gift, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. The inevitable arrived with the cold, damp breath of late winter. The formal announcement came from Mr. Finch, his voice unusually strained, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the assembled servants in the hall. Lord Ashworth's health had deteriorated beyond recovery. He had passed away quietly in his sleep. And with his passing, the fragile dam holding back the tide of debt finally broke. The house was to be sold. Everything. The furniture, the paintings, the silver, the very bricks and mortar. An auction was to be held, a public dismantling of generations of wealth and privilege. A collective gasp rippled through the servants' hall, quickly followed by a stunned silence. It was the news you had all dreaded, the unspoken fear that had hung over the house like a pall. The end of an era. And for you, the end of your known world. Lady Ashworth and the children, now under the guardianship of a distant, disapproving uncle, were to move to a smaller, more modest residence in the country. They would take only a few personal effects. The rest, the vast accumulation of their lives, would be sold off to the highest bidder. For the servants, it meant dismissal. Each of you would receive a month's wages and a character reference, if your service had been deemed satisfactory. It was a meager severance, a stark reminder of your expendability. The days leading up to the auction were a blur of frenetic activity, tinged with an overwhelming sense of loss. The house, once a vibrant, if oppressive, entity, now felt like a corpse, its organs being systematically removed. Auctioneers, their voices loud and jarring, moved through the rooms, tagging everything with small, numbered labels. Strangers, curious onlookers and potential buyers, tramped through the once sacred spaces, their boots scuffing the polished floors, their hands touching objects that had been tended with meticulous care for decades. You watched as the grand piano, where Miss Davies had played her melancholic melodies, was marked for sale. The ancestral portraits, those cold, judging eyes, were taken down from the walls, revealing faint, lighter rectangles where they had hung for centuries. The silver tea service, polished to a gleam for countless breakfasts, was laid out on a trestle table, awaiting its new owner. The atmosphere in the servants' hall was grim. The usual camaraderie was replaced by a quiet desperation. Discussions revolved around potential new positions, the scarcity of good households, the fear of the workhouse. Some of the older servants, who had spent their entire lives in service, looked utterly lost, their faces etched with despair. Mary, her eyes red-rimmed, clutched your arm. "What will we do, Eliza? Where will we go?" You had no answers. Your own future was a terrifying blank slate. You had no family left to return to, no skills beyond those of a housemaid. The city, once a place of fleeting freedom on your half-days, now loomed as a vast, indifferent wilderness. On the day of the auction, the house was filled with a cacophony of sound, the sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel, the shouts of bidders, the murmuring of the crowd. You stood in the shadows of the main hall, watching the spectacle unfold, a silent witness to the dismantling of a world. You saw Lady Ashworth, her face pale and drawn, seated stiffly beside her brother-in-law, her usual composure shattered. Miss Eleanor wept openly, her dreams of a grand debutante season dissolving before her eyes. Master George, surprisingly subdued, stood beside his mother, his usual swagger replaced by a look of bewildered resentment. Miss Davies, however, stood apart, her expression thoughtful, almost serene. She caught your eye from across the crowded hall and offered a small, sad smile, a silent acknowledgement of the shared sorrow, the shared uncertainty. As the last item was sold, as the final gavel fell, a profound silence descended upon the house, broken only by the rustle of papers and the hurried footsteps of the auctioneers. The house was empty, stripped bare, its soul seemingly departed. You walked through the vacant rooms later that evening, your footsteps echoing hollowly. The air was cold, filled with the ghosts of lives lived and wealth squandered. The crack in the banister, your secret marker, was still there, a tiny, defiant truth in the face of overwhelming change. The end of the Ashworth era was not just the end of a family's fortune. It was the end of a chapter in your own life. You were no longer Eliza, the housemaid at Ashworth Manor. You were simply Eliza, adrift in a world that offered little comfort or security. But as you stood in the silent, empty house, a strange sense of quiet resolve settled over you. The house had tried to swallow you whole, but it had not. You had endured. And now, you would face whatever came next, carrying with you the lessons learned, the small rebellions, and the indelible mark of your own name. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was also, terrifyingly, your own. The days following the auction were a blur of anxiety and frantic activity. With the Ashworth house sold, you and the other servants were given a week to vacate the premises. The once grand manor, now stripped of its furnishings, echoed with the hollow sounds of packing and the hurried whispers of uncertain futures. Your character reference, handed to you by a solemn Mr. Finch, was brief and formal. Eliza, housemaid, served diligently for 7 years. Clean, quiet, and efficient. It was a generic commendation, devoid of any personal warmth, but it was all you had. Without a character, a servant stood no chance of securing a new position. The city, once a distant promise of freedom, now loomed as a vast, indifferent labyrinth. You joined the throng of other dismissed servants, all clutching their meager references, all desperate for a new situation. The employment agencies were crowded, their offices filled with the scent of damp wool and nervous perspiration. You stood in long queues, your feet aching, your heart sinking with each passing hour. The competition was fierce. Hundreds of girls, some younger, some more experienced, all vying for the few available positions. You heard stories of girls taking positions for half their usual wages, of others forced into less reputable lines of work. The fear of the workhouse, a grim institution that loomed large in the collective consciousness of the poor, was a constant, chilling presence. You spent your days walking, your worn boots pounding the cobblestones, from one grand square to another, seeking out the situations vacant, notices posted in shop windows or outside the more reputable agencies. Each rejection, each polite but firm "no," chipped away at your fragile hope. Mary, your friend from the Ashworth house, had been fortunate. Her aunt, a cook in a smaller, less grand household, had secured her a position as a kitchen maid. You felt a pang of envy, quickly suppressed. You were happy for her, truly. But her good fortune only highlighted your own precarious situation. One afternoon, utterly exhausted and disheartened, you found yourself near a bustling thoroughfare. A small crowd had gathered around a notice board. You pushed your way through, your eyes scanning the dense text. A small, handwritten card caught your eye. Wanted housemaid. Small, respectable household. Widow. Good character essential. Apply in person, Mrs. Harriet Finch, 14 Willow Street, Bloomsbury. Mrs. Harriet Finch. The name sparked a flicker of recognition. Could it be Mr. Finch's sister? Or perhaps his mother? The butler, for all his stiffness, had always been a fair man. A small, respectable household sounded a world away from the grand, oppressive manor you had left behind. Hope, fragile but persistent, stirred within you. You memorized the address, a small street in Bloomsbury, a quieter, more academic part of the city. It was a long walk, but you set off immediately, your steps imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. Willow Street was a quiet, tree-lined lane, far removed from the bustling commercial districts. Number 14 was a modest terrace house, its brick facade neat and well-maintained, a small patch of garden in front. You took a deep breath, smoothed your apron, and knocked. The door was opened by a woman of middle age, her face kind but serious, her hair neatly pinned back. She wore a simple, dark dress, and her hands, though well-kept, showed signs of work. "Good afternoon," you said, your voice a little shaky. "I've come about the housemaid's position. My name is Eliza." The woman's eyes, a warm brown, scrutinized you. "Come in, child," she said, her voice gentle. "I am Mrs. Harriet Finch." Your heart gave a small leap. It was indeed Mr. Finch's sister. The connection, however tenuous, felt like a lifeline. She led you into a small, cozy parlor, filled with books and the scent of lavender. She listened patiently as you presented your reference, her gaze thoughtful. She asked you questions, not just about your duties, but about your experience, your character, your aspirations. She seemed genuinely interested, a stark contrast to the perfunctory interviews you had endured elsewhere. You have served the Ashworths for 7 years, she mused, reading your reference. A grand house, that. And a demanding mistress, I hear. You simply nodded, unsure how to respond. She smiled faintly. My brother Arthur spoke of you. He said you were a diligent and quiet girl. He holds you in high regard. A wave of relief washed over you. Mr. Finch, for all his formality, had remembered you, had spoken well of you. It was a small act of kindness that had a profound impact. I am a widow, Eliza, Mrs. Finch explained. My husband, a scholar, passed away 2 years ago. It is just myself and my 2 young nieces, who live with me. I need someone reliable, someone who understands the need for order and quiet, but also someone who is kind. She looked at you, her gaze steady. Are you kind, Eliza? The question was unexpected, disarming. You had never been asked to define yourself in such terms. I try to be, ma'am, you stammered. She nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. Good. I believe you will suit. The wages are modest, but the work is steady, and the hours are reasonable. And there will be no bells, Eliza. Not in this house. Your eyes widened. No bells. The words were a revelation, a promise of a different kind of servitude, one perhaps less oppressive, less dehumanizing. Thank you, ma'am, you said, a genuine smile finally breaking through your worry. I would be most grateful for the position. The search had been long, fraught with fear and uncertainty. But in the quiet parlor of Mrs. Harriet Finch, you found a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new beginning, a place where perhaps, just perhaps, you might finally be seen, not just as a servant, but as Eliza. The transition to Mrs. Harriet Finch's household at 14 Willow Street was like stepping into a different world, a quieter, gentler rhythm that was a stark contrast to the relentless demands of Ashworth Manor. The house itself was smaller, cozier, filled with the scent of old books, fresh bread, and the faint, sweet aroma of dried flowers. There were no other servants, save for a daily charwoman who came in the mornings. You were the sole housemaid, responsible for the general upkeep of the house, the cooking, and the care of Mrs. Finch's 2 young nieces, Clara and Lily, who were 10 and 8 respectively. The absence of bells was the most profound change. Instead of the jarring jingle that dictated your every move, Mrs. Finch communicated her needs directly, in a calm, clear voice. Eliza, would you mind bringing tea? Or, Eliza, could you help the girls with their lessons? It was a small thing, but it transformed the nature of your work, making it feel less like a series of commands and more like a collaboration. Mrs. Finch herself was a woman of quiet scholarship and deep kindness. She spent her days in her study, surrounded by books, often translating ancient texts. She treated you with respect, always addressing you by your name, always acknowledging your efforts. She was firm but fair, and her expectations, though clear, were reasonable. The children, Clara and Lily, were lively but well-behaved. They were curious and intelligent, eager to learn. You found yourself enjoying their company, helping them with their sums, reading them stories from their picture books. You even taught them a few simple songs you remembered from your own childhood, forgotten melodies that now resurfaced, bringing a faint, bittersweet comfort. The work was still hard, of course. There was always cleaning, always cooking, always laundry. But the pace was less frantic, the pressure less intense. You had time to breathe, to think, to simply be. You even had your own small room, not a shared attic space, but a tiny, neat chamber with a window overlooking the quiet street. It was a luxury you had never known, a private sanctuary where you could truly be alone. One evening, as you were preparing supper, Mrs. Finch came into the kitchen. She often did, not to supervise, but to chat, to discuss the day's events. Eliza, she began, her voice thoughtful. I've noticed you have a fondness for books. You often tidy the shelves in my study with such care. You flushed, a little embarrassed. You did indeed linger over the books, sometimes stealing a few moments to read a page or two when you thought no one was looking. I enjoy them, ma'am, you admitted. She smiled. My husband, God rest his soul, believed that knowledge should be accessible to all. He amassed quite a library. If you ever wish to borrow a book, Eliza, you have my permission. And if you have questions, I would be happy to discuss them with you. Your heart leaped. It was an offer beyond your wildest dreams. To be allowed to read, freely, openly, without fear of punishment. To discuss books with a scholar. It was an unimaginable luxury. Thank you, ma'am, you said, your voice thick with emotion. That would be a great privilege. The small household at Willow Street was not without its challenges. The finances were still modest, and Mrs. Finch had to be careful with every penny. But there was a sense of quiet contentment, a feeling of shared purpose that had been utterly absent in the grand and personal world of Ashworth Manor. You found yourself sleeping more soundly, waking without the familiar knot of dread in your stomach. Your hands, though still calloused from work, felt less raw. You even started to hum as you went about your duties, a soft, tuneless melody that spoke of a burgeoning peace. This new rhythm, this different kind of servitude, was slowly, imperceptibly, healing the wounds of your past. You were still a servant, yes, but you were also Eliza, a woman who was seen, who was valued, who was allowed the small, precious luxury of her own thoughts, her own dreams, and the quiet comfort of books. It was a new chapter, a different kind of life, and for the first time in a long time, you felt a flicker of hope for the future. The offer to read from Mrs. Finch's library was a gift beyond measure, a key to a world you had only glimpsed from afar. In the evenings, after the children were asleep and the last dishes were put away, you would carefully select a book from the study. Sometimes it was a collection of poetry, its verses weaving intricate tapestries of emotion. Other times, it was a historical account, transporting you to distant lands and forgotten eras. Mrs. Finch, true to her word, would often join you in the parlor, her own book in hand. She never hovered, never made you feel as though you were intruding. Instead, she would offer quiet explanations, answer your hesitant questions, and gently guide you through complex ideas. She spoke of literature, philosophy, and history with a passion that was infectious, opening your mind to concepts you had never imagined. Reading, Eliza, she once said, her eyes alight, is not merely about absorbing words. It is about understanding the world, about connecting with minds across centuries. It is freedom, in its purest form. You devoured every word, every concept. You learned about the French Revolution, about the struggles for liberty and equality that resonated deeply with your own experiences of oppression. You read Shakespeare, his characters speaking to the universal truths of human nature. You discovered the works of female authors, their voices a powerful, inspiring chorus in a world dominated by men. The children, Clara and Lily, also became unwitting participants in your education. You would help them with their lessons, and in doing so, you found yourself revisiting basic arithmetic, improving your handwriting, and even learning rudimentary geography. You would often read to them from their storybooks, and their innocent questions sometimes sparked deeper discussions with Mrs. Finch. One afternoon, as you were helping Clara with her sums, she looked up at you, her brow furrowed. Eliza, how do you know all this? You're not a governess. You smiled, a little sadly. No, Clara. I learned what I could, when I could. You thought of the stolen moments in the Ashworth Library, the quick glances at newspapers, the secret letter. Mrs. Finch, who had entered the room, overheard the exchange. Eliza is a very clever young woman, Clara, she said gently. And she has a thirst for knowledge, which is a rare and precious thing. She turned to you. Eliza, have you ever considered teaching? The question hung in the air, startling in its audacity. Teaching? You? A housemaid? The idea was so far removed from your reality that it seemed almost laughable. Ma'am, I am a servant, you stammered, the ingrained humility asserting itself. And a very good one. Mrs. Finch replied, her gaze firm. But that does not mean you cannot be more. You have a natural patience with the children, and you explain things clearly. You have a keen mind. These are the qualities of a good teacher. She paused, then continued, her voice thoughtful. I have a friend, Miss Eleanor Vance, who runs a small school for girls from less fortunate backgrounds. She is always looking for capable assistants. Perhaps you might consider it, when the time is right. The suggestion, though tentative, planted a seed of an idea in your mind, a possibility that had never existed before. To be a teacher. To share the knowledge that had so transformed your own life. It was a daunting prospect, fraught with challenges, but also filled with an exhilarating promise. You continued your duties, but now, as you polished the furniture or kneaded dough for bread, your mind was alive with new thoughts, new possibilities. The books in Mrs. Finch's library were no longer just a source of comfort. They were a pathway, a glimpse into a future you dared to dream of. The seeds of learning, once scattered haphazardly, were now beginning to take root, promising a harvest far richer than you had ever imagined. This small, quiet household was not just a refuge. It was a crucible, forging a new identity, a new purpose for Eliza. Life at Willow Street settled into a comfortable, if still industrious, routine. The days flowed smoothly, punctuated by the children's laughter, the quiet rustle of Mrs. Finch's books, and the satisfying rhythm of your own work. You continued to read, to learn, to grow, the possibility of a future beyond service slowly taking shape in your mind. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a shadow from your past appeared, threatening to disrupt the fragile peace you had found. You were returning from the market, a basket laden with fresh vegetables, when you saw him. Master George Ashworth. He stood on the corner of Willow Street, leaning against the lamppost, his usual swagger diminished, replaced by a dissipated air. His clothes, though still fine, were rumpled, and his face was thinner, marked by a faint stubble and a haunted look in his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen better days, and perhaps, worse ones. Your heart hammered against your ribs. You instinctively lowered your head, hoping to pass unnoticed. You had heard snippets of gossip about the Ashworths since their departure from the manor. Lady Ashworth and Miss Eleanor were living quietly in the country, their social life drastically curtailed. Master George, however, had reportedly fallen further into debt and disrepute, frequenting gambling dens and associating with unsavory characters. As you tried to slip past, his eyes, once so dismissive, now seemed to scan the street with a desperate intensity. His gaze snagged on you. "Eliza?" he called out, his voice hoarse, a mixture of surprise and something akin to recognition. You froze, your hand tightening on the basket. There was no escaping him. You turned, forcing a polite, neutral expression onto your face. "Master George," you acknowledged, offering a slight, deferential nod. He pushed himself off the lamppost, approaching you with an unsteady gait. "Well, well. Fancy meeting you here. I heard the old place was sold. What became of you, then?" His tone was a strange mix of condescension and a faint, almost pathetic curiosity. "I found a new position, Master George," you replied, keeping your voice even. He scoffed. "A housemaid still? After all these years? I thought perhaps you'd have moved up. Governess, perhaps. You always were a clever one, weren't you?" His eyes lingered on your face, a flicker of something unsettling in their depths. You felt a prickle of unease. His words, though seemingly complimentary, carried a veiled threat, a reminder of the power he once held over you. "I am content with my situation, Master George," you said, trying to end the conversation. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Content? You? In a place like this? Don't be absurd, Eliza. You were always too smart for your station. I remember that. Always watching, always listening." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You saw things, didn't you? In the old house. Things about my father." Your blood ran cold. He was referring to the miniature portrait, the secret you had discovered. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. "I saw nothing, Master George," you said, your voice firm, betraying no emotion. I was a servant. I only saw to my duties. He narrowed his eyes, a glint of suspicion in their depths. Don't play coy with me, Eliza. You were always too observant. My father, he had his secrets. And I believe you know some of them. He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a desperate edge. I'm in a spot of bother, Eliza. A great deal of bother. I need funds. If you know anything that could be of use, I'd be willing to make it worth your while. He was trying to blackmail you, to exploit your knowledge for his own desperate ends. The thought filled you with a cold fury. I know nothing, Master George, you repeated, her voice sharper now. And I have no funds to offer you. If you will excuse me, I have duties to attend to. You tried to move past him, but he put a hand on your arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't be foolish, girl. A little information could go a long way. Think of it as an investment in your future. Before you could respond, a voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. Is there a problem here, Master George? You both turned. Mrs. Finch stood on her doorstep, having evidently seen the exchange from her window. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a steely resolve you had never seen before. Master George's hand dropped from your arm. He visibly recoiled, his face paling. Mrs. Finch! I was merely inquiring after Eliza's well-being. An old family servant, you see. His voice was suddenly meek, almost fawning. Indeed, Mrs. Finch replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. Eliza is a valued member of this household, and I believe she has made it clear she has no further business with you. I suggest you take your leave, Master George. Immediately. Master George hesitated for a moment, then, with a defeated sigh, he mumbled an apology and turned, hurrying away down the street, his shadow lengthening as he disappeared around the corner. You stood trembling, the basket of vegetables almost slipping from your grasp. Mrs. Finch came to your side, her hand resting gently on your back. Are you all right, Eliza? She asked, her voice filled with concern. You nodded, still shaken. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. He was trying to. I know, she said, her voice grim. I suspected he might try something of the sort. He has a reputation, I'm afraid. But you handled him with admirable composure. She looked at you, her gaze steady. Whatever secrets you may or may not possess, Eliza, they are safe here. You are safe here. Her words were a profound comfort, a balm to your shaken nerves. The shadow from your past had appeared, threatening to disrupt your new life, but it had been repelled by the quiet strength of Mrs. Finch. You realized, with a surge of gratitude, that you had found not just a new employer, but a protector, a true ally. The past might still cast its long shadows, but in this house, in this quiet street, you finally felt truly safe. The encounter with Master George, unsettling as it was, solidified your resolve. The precariousness of your past life, the constant threat of dismissal, the vulnerability to the whims of others, you wanted to leave it all behind. The path Mrs. Finch had hinted at, the possibility of teaching, began to shine brighter, a beacon towards a future of true independence. You began to dedicate every spare moment to your studies. Mrs. Finch, noticing your renewed determination, became your mentor. She provided you with textbooks, patiently explained complex concepts, and even set you small assignments, treating you not as a servant, but as a pupil. You learned about pedagogy, the art and science of teaching. You practiced your penmanship until your handwriting was clear and elegant. You delved deeper into history, literature, and mathematics, eager to absorb every scrap of knowledge. The children, Clara and Lily, became your unwitting practice students, their innocent questions helping you to refine your explanations. Eliza, Mrs. Finch said one evening, as you reviewed a grammar lesson, Miss Eleanor Vance, the headmistress of the girls' school, will be visiting me next week. I have spoken to her about you. She is willing to consider you for an assistant teaching position, should you still be interested. Your heart leaped. This was it. The opportunity you had secretly longed for. Yes, ma'am. I am very interested. Good, she smiled. She is a discerning woman, Eliza. Be prepared to demonstrate your knowledge and your passion for teaching. The week leading up to Miss Vance's visit was a whirlwind of nervous preparation. You revised everything you had learned, practiced your explanations, and tried to calm the butterflies fluttering in your stomach. When Miss Vance arrived, she was a formidable woman, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She spent an hour with you in the parlor, questioning you on various subjects, assessing your knowledge, your clarity of thought, and your ability to articulate ideas. You answered her questions with a newfound confidence, drawing upon the vast well of knowledge you had accumulated. Finally, she leaned back, a thoughtful expression on her face. You have an excellent grasp of the material, Eliza, and a commendable dedication to learning. However, she paused, and your heart sank. You lack formal training. And of course, your background. Mrs. Finch interjected gently. Miss Vance, Eliza has had a unique education, perhaps more practical than any formal schooling. She has learned resilience, patience, and a deep understanding of human nature, qualities invaluable in a teacher. Miss Vance considered this, then looked at you. What makes you believe you can teach, Eliza? Beyond your knowledge, what do you bring to the classroom? You took a deep breath. This was the moment. Ma'am, you began, her voice steady. I have spent my life in the shadows, unseen and unheard. I know what it is to yearn for knowledge, to crave understanding, when it is denied to you. I know the power of a single kind word, a single opportunity. I believe I can teach not just facts, but also the value of learning, the importance of curiosity, and the strength that comes from an educated mind. I want to help girls like myself, who might otherwise never have the chance, to find their own voices, to build their own futures. A flicker of something akin to admiration crossed Miss Vance's face. She looked at Mrs. Finch, then back at you. Very well, Eliza, she said, her voice firm. I will offer you a probationary position as an assistant teacher. The wages are modest, but you will have board and lodging at the school. And you will be given the opportunity to continue your own studies, to gain the formal qualifications you lack. A wave of overwhelming relief and joy washed over you. You had done it. You had taken the first step on the path to independence. Thank you, ma'am, you said, your voice thick with emotion. Thank you both. Mrs. Finch smiled, her eyes shining with pride. I knew you could do it, Eliza. The day you left Willow Street was bittersweet. You hugged Clara and Lily, who clung to you, sad to see you go. You embraced Mrs. Finch, a woman who had offered you not just employment, but a chance at a new life. You have given me more than a home, ma'am, you said, tears welling in your eyes. You have given me hope. She squeezed your hand. You earned it, Eliza. Now go, and make your mark on the world. As you walked away from Willow Street, your small trunk in hand, you looked back at the modest house, a sanctuary that had nurtured your transformation. The bells of Ashworth Manor were a distant echo now, a fading memory of a past life. You were no longer just a servant. You were Eliza, a woman on the cusp of a new beginning, stepping onto a path of her own choosing, a path towards independence, knowledge, and the quiet, powerful freedom of teaching. The journey had been long, but the destination, finally, felt within reach. The girls' school, run by Miss Eleanor Vance, was a modest but bustling establishment located in a quieter, respectable part of London. It was housed in a large, converted townhouse, its rooms repurposed into classrooms, a small library, and dormitories for the girls who boarded there. The air hummed with the energy of young minds, the chatter of lessons, and the occasional burst of childish laughter. Your probationary position as an assistant teacher was challenging but immensely rewarding. You were assigned to the younger girls, teaching them reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. The formal training you lacked was compensated by your innate patience, your clear explanations, and your deep empathy for their struggles. You remembered your own yearning for knowledge, and it fueled your desire to make learning accessible and engaging for them. Miss Vance, though strict, was a fair and encouraging mentor. She observed your lessons, offered constructive criticism, and provided you with additional books and resources to further your own education. In the evenings, after the girls were asleep, you would pore over textbooks, studying grammar, history, and even rudimentary science, eager to absorb everything you could. The other assistant teachers, mostly young women from similar backgrounds who had managed to acquire some education, were initially reserved, but soon warmed to your quiet dedication. You found camaraderie in shared duties, in discussing lesson plans, and in the quiet moments of shared tea in the staff room. The most profound change, however, was the shift in your identity. No longer were you Eliza, the housemaid, defined by your duties and your invisibility. You were Eliza, the teacher, addressed with respect by the girls and your colleagues. You stood at the front of the classroom, a chalk in your hand, your voice clear and confident, guiding young minds, shaping their understanding of the world. You discovered a profound joy in teaching. The moment a girl's eyes lit up with understanding, the satisfaction of seeing them grasp a difficult concept, the pride in their small achievements, these were rewards far greater than any wages. You saw reflections of your younger self in their eager faces, in their quiet struggles, and you felt a deep connection, a sense of purpose that resonated to your very core. One afternoon, during a history lesson, you were explaining the concept of social classes in Victorian England. You spoke of the rigid hierarchy, the vast chasm between the rich and the poor, the lives of those who served and those who were served. You spoke from personal experience, though you carefully avoided revealing too much of your own past at Ashworth Manor. A small girl, barely 7 years old, raised her hand. "Miss Eliza," she asked, her voice earnest, "why do some people have so much, and others have so little?" The question, so simple and yet so profound, echoed the very questions you had silently asked throughout your own life. You paused, then replied, "That, my dear, is a question that many clever people have pondered throughout history. And it is a question that we, as educated individuals, must continue to ask, and perhaps, one day, find answers to." You saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a spark of curiosity that went beyond the mere facts of history. It was in moments like these that you realized the true power of your new calling. You were not just imparting knowledge, you were fostering critical thinking, encouraging empathy, and inspiring a generation of girls to question the world around them. The small room you occupied at the school was simple, but it was your own. It had a small desk piled with books, a comfortable chair, and a window that overlooked a quiet courtyard. Here, in the evenings, you would write in a small, leather-bound journal that Mrs. Finch had given you as a parting gift. You wrote about your days, your lessons, your hopes, and your reflections on the world. It was a private space, a testament to your newfound intellectual freedom. The journey from the cold, silent attic of Ashworth Manor to the bustling, intellectually stimulating environment of the girls' school had been long and arduous. You had faced hardship, fear, and the constant threat of invisibility. But through it all, you had held on to your name, your quiet rebellions, and your thirst for knowledge. Now, as you stood in front of your class, your voice clear and strong, you knew that you had found your true calling. You were no longer defined by the bells that had once dictated your life. You were Eliza, the teacher, sowing the seeds of learning, nurturing young minds, and building a future not just for yourself, but for the countless girls who, like you, deserved a chance to step out of the shadows and into the light. The path to independence was long, but you were walking it, one confident step at a time. Years passed, and your life at the school flourished. You had earned your formal qualifications, rising from assistant to a respected full teacher. The girls adored you, and Miss Vance relied on your judgment and dedication. You had found not just a profession, but a community, a sense of belonging you had never known. One crisp spring afternoon, a carriage pulled up outside the school. It was a modest vehicle, but well maintained, and a liveried driver opened the door for a woman who stepped out. Your heart gave a jolt. It was Miss Eleanor Ashworth, now a young lady of perhaps 20, no longer the demanding child who threw toast on the floor. She had matured, her features softened, and she carried herself with a quiet elegance, though her clothes were far less ostentatious than those her mother once favored. She looked around the schoolyard, her eyes thoughtful, then approached the front door. A younger teacher, unaware of your past connection, came to fetch you. Miss Eliza, there is a visitor for you. A Miss Ashworth. You felt a tremor of apprehension. Why would she be here? Had something happened? Had Master George, perhaps, found new trouble? You walked to the reception area, your composure carefully maintained. Miss Eleanor turned as you approached, and her eyes, once so dismissive, now held a flicker of surprise, then recognition. Eliza? She said, her voice soft, a little uncertain. It is you, isn't it? You look different. Miss Eleanor, you replied, offering a polite, formal nod. It is indeed. What brings you to the school? She hesitated, then gestured to a small parlor. May we speak privately? It is a delicate matter. You led her into the parlor, your mind racing. She sat gracefully on a simple wooden chair, her hands clasped in her lap. I heard about your new profession from Mrs. Finch, she began, her gaze direct. She spoke very highly of you. Said you had quite a gift for teaching. You felt a faint flush of pride. Mrs. Finch was very kind to me, Mississippi. She was, Miss Eleanor agreed. She is a remarkable woman. And she spoke of your circumstances, after the manor was sold. She paused, then continued, her voice tinged with a faint sadness. It was a difficult time for us all. Especially for my father. You remained silent, waiting. Eliza, she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate tone. I have come to apologize. For how we treated you. For how we treated all the servants. We were thoughtless. Selfish. We took everything for granted. She looked down at her hands. My mother, she never truly recovered from father's death, or the loss of the house. She lives a very quiet life now. And George, well, George is still a source of considerable worry. Her apology was unexpected, sincere. It was a profound moment, a recognition of the injustices of the past from one who had benefited from them. You were children, Miss Eleanor, you said gently. And you were raised in a certain way. She looked up, her eyes meeting yours. That is no excuse. I have learned much since then. Life in the country, without the endless staff, has taught me a great deal about necessity. And about the value of honest work. She paused, then continued, her voice hesitant. I remember when I was very young I asked your name. And I forgot it. I am truly sorry, Eliza. Your throat tightened. The memory was a small, persistent wound, and her acknowledgement of it was a powerful balm. It is forgotten, miss, you said, meaning it. She offered a small, grateful smile. Thank you. But that is not entirely why I am here. There is another matter. A more personal one. She took a deep breath. My father, before he passed, he spoke of a woman. A Clara. And a son. He was often confused in his final days, but he spoke of them with such longing. She looked at you, her eyes searching. Do you know anything of this, Eliza? He spoke of a secret, something hidden in his study. Your heart pounded. The secret. After all these years, it was finally surfacing. You looked at Miss Eleanor, at her earnest, troubled face. She was no longer the indifferent child, but a woman seeking truth, seeking understanding. Miss Eleanor, you began, choosing your words carefully. I was a servant in your father's house. I saw many things, but I was not privy to his personal affairs. However, I did once come across a small, hidden compartment in his study. And inside, there was a miniature portrait of a woman named Clara and a young boy. Miss Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Then it was true. All of it. Tears welled in her eyes. My father, he carried such a burden. She looked at you, her expression a mixture of shock and gratitude. Thank you, Eliza. Thank you for telling me. I always suspected there was more to his sadness. She stood, her gaze lingering on you. You have become a remarkable woman, Eliza. Far more than any of us ever gave you credit for. I am truly glad to see you thriving. She extended her hand. You took it. Her grip was firm, warm, a genuine connection between two women who had once existed in entirely separate worlds. "Goodbye, Eliza," she said, her voice gentle. "And thank you for everything." As she left, you stood in the quiet parlor, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within you. The visit from the past, initially a source of apprehension, had become a moment of profound closure. The apology, the acknowledgement, the shared secret, it had all contributed to a sense of peace you hadn't known you needed. You had faced your past, and it had, surprisingly, offered you a gift, the validation of your own journey, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, finally, you were truly seen. Years turned into decades. The small girls you once taught grew into young women, some returning to the school as teachers themselves, others venturing out into the world, carrying with them the lessons you had imparted. Miss Eleanor Vance, the formidable headmistress, eventually retired, and after much deliberation, the Board of Governors, with Mrs. Harriet Finch's strong recommendation, offered you the position of headmistress. It was a moment of profound triumph, a culmination of a journey that had begun in the cold, silent attic of Ashworth Manor. You, Eliza, the former housemaid, now stood at the helm of an institution dedicated to empowering young women through education. The school flourished under your leadership. You expanded the curriculum, introducing new subjects like natural sciences and practical skills, believing that a well-rounded education was essential for girls to navigate the complexities of the modern world. You established a scholarship fund for girls from impoverished backgrounds, ensuring that no aspiring mind was turned away due to lack of means. You remembered your own struggle for knowledge, and you vowed to make the path easier for others. Your philosophy of education was rooted in empathy and respect. You fostered an environment where girls were encouraged to ask questions, to think critically, and to find their own voices. You taught them not just facts, but resilience, kindness, and a quiet strength that came from knowing one's own worth. Mrs. Harriet Finch remained a close friend and confidant, a constant source of wisdom and support. She would often visit the school, her eyes twinkling with pride as she observed your lessons, her presence a comforting reminder of the woman who had first seen your potential. You never married, dedicating your life fully to the school and its mission. You found a profound sense of fulfillment in your work, in the hundreds of lives you touched, in the legacy of education you were building. The Ashworths faded into the distant past, their grand manor a memory, their fortunes scattered. You sometimes heard faint echoes of their lives, Master George, perpetually in trouble, Miss Eleanor, living a quiet, respectable life in the country. But their world no longer held sway over yours. One evening, as you sat in your study at the school, a room filled with books and the quiet hum of satisfied work, you picked up your old journal. You had written in it sporadically over the years, documenting your journey, your thoughts, your small victories. You turned to the first page, to the entry from your early days at Ashworth Manor, where you had whispered your name into the linen cupboard, a desperate affirmation of your existence. You read of the cold, the silence, the invisibility. You read of the small rebellions, the stolen moments of joy, the fear of the vanishing ones. Then you turned to the later entries, to the quiet comfort of Willow Street, to the thrill of learning, to the first tentative steps into teaching. And finally to the present, to your role as headmistress, to the vibrant life you had built. You closed the journal, a profound sense of peace settling over you. The crack in the banister, your secret marker, was long gone, along with the house it inhabited. But the truth it represented, the truth of your enduring spirit, remained. You had kept something they couldn't take. Not your time, not your youth, not your hands. You had given those freely in service. But you had kept your name, your identity, your spirit. And you had built something new, something lasting, something that would empower countless others to keep their own. You stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet schoolyard, bathed in the soft glow of the gas lamps. The world had changed, and you, Eliza, had changed with it. You were no longer the silent servant, the invisible shadow. You were a woman of substance, of purpose, of quiet strength. And in the silence of the night, you whispered your name aloud. Once more. And let it echo, not just for yourself, but for every girl who would walk through these doors, for every mind you would help to awaken, for every future you would help to build. It was a legacy forged in hardship, tempered by resilience, and illuminated by the enduring power of knowledge and the quiet strength of an aim.